What's the cost of too many suppliers, and why that's an important question for sellers to ask? The consolidation of suppliers can be seen as either an opportunity or a threat. Buyers are focused on achieving savings, and that entails negotiating hard with suppliers. However, there may be a strategy that your customers could employ to deliver significant savings while at the same time maintaining or perhaps even improving your margins. That strategy is the consolidation of suppliers. If your customers are using too many suppliers to supply them with the same products and services as you supply, then they're wasting money. Helping your customer to consolidate more of their orders with your company can save them money while saving your margins too. Perhaps your company is one of 5, 10, or maybe even 20 suppliers of the same product or service to a particular customer. Maybe your supplies account for 5 or 15% of their purchases. Imagine if the number of suppliers was reduced from 50 or 20 down to 5, increasing your percentage of the customer's total spend to 55%. Think of how the extra volume and improved economies of scale could enable you to offer improved prices to the customer. Well, that's is only one way in which the customer could save. In order to understand the potential savings to the customer from consolidating the number of suppliers, let's examine the cost of adding another supplier. What's the cost to add another supplier? That's an important question because it can reveal how pressing or otherwise it is for the customer to cut supplier numbers and therefore help you to determine how likely that is to happen. And it is a selling point for sourcing more of their requirements from you or giving you more of their business. In order to explore what the cost of an extra supplier is for your customer, let's take a workday example. Let's look at the cost of engaging with a new supplier under a number of headings. The first heading is selecting the supplier, including supplier search and screening, supplier briefing, supplier selection, contracting and negotiation, all those activities. Then let's look at the activities under the heading of labelled managing, including supplier meetings, supplier correspondence and the process around supplier reviews. The third heading, which we're going to examine the costs and activities involved in managing an additional supplier, is in relation to processing of orders, of payments and other activities such as, for example, the managing of stock from the supplier. Let's examine the activities under selecting a supplier. Let's look across the top here at the number of days, the number of people involved and whether those activities are taking place every quarter or whether they're an annual or once-off event. In this example, we have inputted a number of days that wouldn't at all be surprising in relation to the different activities. So supplier search and screening is 1 day. There's 3 people involved in that activity, so annually it's 3 days. Supplier briefing is a half day, 3 people involved. Supplier selection, a half day, 3 people involved. Contract negotiation, a half a day, 3 people involved. So the totals are then added up. We look at the quarterly activities of managing suppliers. So these are activities that are taking place on an ongoing basis every quarter. So supplier meetings, supplier correspondence and supplier reviews. We look at the last set of activities, the processing of orders, of payments and other activities within the procure to pay life cycle, such as, for example, the managing of stock from the supplier. Then again, looking at the number of days and the number of people involved each quarter, giving us a total in the far right hand column in terms of the annual number of days. So when that up, we see the total number of days involved for selecting the supplier as 67.5 days over the course of a year, with most of those days being taken up with the managing of supplier. So we want to calculate now the total cost per supplier for the buyer based on that total of 67.5 days. To do that, we're going to take a typical salary cost of 60. We're going to look at the overhead and expenses associated at 20%, bringing the salary and associated costs up to 72. We're going to take the working day norm of 220 working days in a year to give us a cost per day for that individual then of 327 per day. So if we take our 67.5 days to select, to manage and to process all those activities relating to that extra supplier, and we're going to multiply our 67.5 multiplied by $327 or euro per day. That then gives us the total cost. The total cost per supplier to the buyer in terms of the time and activities involved in managing the supplier is 22,091. Now it's important to note that that's not, of course, the total cost, because we're excluding here the cost of discounts lost because of failure to leverage bulk purchasing, for example. That can be a significant figure. That could be 3%, 5%, or even 10% of the total cost of the goods purchased. However, let's go back to our simple yet compelling analysis. We've seen that the total cost of a supplier over the course of a year is 67.5 days, based on the cost per day of the salary and associated expenses of the person. That results in a figure of 22,000 per supplier. So what we're really arriving at is a number that says that over 5 years an extra supplier costs over $100,000 or euro, as the case may be. Every 5 years, 10 extra suppliers would cost that organisation 1 million plus. 100 extra suppliers would cost 10 million plus. So the rationale to consolidate the number of suppliers is compelling. That's why it's important for the seller to address this issue of the cost of an extra supplier. The savings that's available to the buyer that are derived from reducing the number of suppliers. So how much of that 5-year cost can you help the buyer to save by reducing 1, 3, 5, 7, whatever number of suppliers from your category?